In a kingdom carved from mountain and might, there ruled a king named Theron. His power was as vast as the sky, but his heart was a storm-tossed sea. His temper was a thunderclap that made courtiers tremble, and his impatience a wildfire that consumed all reason. He commanded armies, built fortresses of impenetrable stone, and his treasury overflowed with the spoils of conquest. Yet for all his might, a gnawing emptiness echoed in the grand halls of his palace. He was a king of everything, but a master of nothing within himself. Desiring to immortalize his power, Theron summoned the most renowned sculptor in the land, a woman named Lyra. She was known not just for the life she breathed into stone, but for the wisdom she held in her heart. When Theron, in his usual booming voice, demanded she carve a statue of him, one that would make even the gods envious, Lyra met his fiery gaze with a calm that was as deep and still as a forest lake. She agreed, but with one condition. "Your Majesty," she said, her voice soft yet firm, "I will carve your likeness, but you must remain here in my workshop and watch as I work." "Every day, from dawn until dusk." Theron scoffed. The idea was absurd. A king tethered to a dusty workshop? He had wars to plan, decrees to issue. But Lyra's unwavering stare held a challenge he couldn't refuse. It pricked his pride. Intrigued and slightly insulted, he accepted, believing it a simple, if tedious, task. The first day, he arrived cloaked in irritation. Lyra's workshop was a humble space filled with the scent of wet clay and stone dust. She gestured to a massive, untouched block of marble. "This is you, Your Majesty." "As you are now." Theron watched, his foot tapping impatiently as Lyra spent the entire morning just circling the stone. She touched it, listened to it, her eyes tracing invisible lines. Hours crawled by. She didn't lift a single tool. The king's frustration mounted. "Are you going to work, or simply stare at this rock all day?" he boomed. Lyra simply smiled. "Patience, Your Majesty. I am listening to what the stone wishes to shed." The next day, she finally picked up a chisel and hammer. With a sharp crack, a small, jagged piece of marble fell to the floor. Lyra picked it up. She looked at Theron and said, "This piece we will call impatience." She placed it on a small shelf. Theron's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. A few more chips fell. "This one is hasty judgment," she announced. And this, unchecked pride. Day after day, this ritual continued. Lyra worked with a slowness that drove the king to madness. Each piece she chipped away was given a name. Reckless anger, deaf arrogance, cruel words. The pile of named flaws on the shelf grew, a monument to his own brokenness. Theron felt a rage he had never known. He was a king, being lectured by a common artisan through fragments of stone. He yelled, he threatened, he stormed around the workshop, his voice echoing off the walls. But Lyra remained serene, her hammer and chisel moving with a steady, rhythmic grace as if his fury were just a passing breeze. Weeks bled into months. The seasons began to turn. The initial storm of Theron's anger slowly subsided, replaced by a sullen, simmering resentment. He watched Lyra's hands, strong and sure, as they revealed the vague shape of a man within the marble. He started noticing things he'd never seen before, the way the morning light caught the dust motes dancing in the air, the subtle changes in the stone's texture, the quiet strength in Lyra's posture. He was still a king, but his world had shrunk to this single room. His grand pronouncements were met not with fear, but with the steady tap-tapping of Lyra's hammer. Here, his power meant nothing. He was just a man forced to sit in silence and watch his own soul being painstakingly dissected. One afternoon, as Lyra chiseled near the emerging figure's heart, a particular large piece of marble broke away. She held it in her palm. "This," she said quietly, her eyes meeting his, "is the loneliness of a man who builds walls instead of bridges." Something in Theron broke. The word struck him with the force of a physical blow. He looked at the growing pile of his named flaws, and for the first time he didn't see an insult. He saw the truth. He saw a man so terrified of being seen as weak that he had become a fortress, impenetrable even to himself. A profound sadness washed over him, hollowing him out. He was the most powerful man in the kingdom, yet he was utterly, desperately alone. He sat in silence for the rest of the day. When dawn broke the next morning, he walked over to Lyra. "Show me," he said, his voice stripped of its usual command, now quiet and raw. Lyra handed him a small hammer and a fine chisel. His first attempts were clumsy. He struck too hard, scarring the stone. He held the chisel at the wrong angle, his frustration rising. But Lyra was patient. She guided his hand, showing him how to feel the grain of the marble, how to listen for the right sound, how to work with the stone, not against it. A new chapter began. The king and the sculptor worked side by side. Theron learned the language of stone, the virtue of a gentle touch, the wisdom in slow, deliberate progress. He learned to pour his frustration not into rage, but into the focused energy of his hammer. He carved away at the statue, and with each strike, he felt he was carving away the hardness around his own heart. He spent less time thinking about the kingdom and more time thinking about the man in the stone. He began talking to Lyra not as a king to a subject, but as a student to a teacher. He spoke of his fears, his regrets, the crushing weight of his crown. And she listened, offering not advice, but quiet understanding. A full year passed. The king who had entered the workshop was gone. The man who remained was calmer, his eyes holding a depth and wisdom that had replaced the fire of his anger. His shoulders, once squared with aggression, were now settled with a quiet confidence. One evening, they both stepped back. The statue was complete. It was undeniably Theron, but it was a Theron no one had ever seen. The figure stood not in a pose of arrogant power, but in one of quiet contemplation. The lines on the face were not of fury, but of thought and experience. There was strength in the hands, but it was the strength of a creator, not a destroyer. The eyes, so expertly carved, seemed to hold a universe of newfound peace. Theron reached out and touched the statue's stone face. It was cool and smooth. He looked at Lyra, his own eyes glistening. "You did not carve a statue of a king," he said, his voice filled with a gratitude so deep it was almost a whisper. Lyra smiled, a genuine, warm smile. "No, Your Majesty," she replied. "We did. We carved a statue of a man who learned how to become one." The statue was placed in the center of the royal gardens, but it was not an object of fear. It became a symbol of transformation, a reminder to all that the greatest strength is not the power to command others, but the courage to master oneself. And King Theron, now truly a leader, ruled for many long and peaceful years, his reign remembered not for his conquests, but for his wisdom, his compassion, and the quiet strength he first found in a dusty workshop chipping away at stone. Thank you so much for watching. If this story resonated with you, consider subscribing for more tales of wisdom and transformation. Until next time,